Josh King, welcome into the podcast for
Yeah,
the first time.
thank you.
It's so good to have you.
Yeah.
Traveling all the way in from Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yeah, I'm on the fringes.
Yeah.
I'm on the outliers.
Yes, I've wanted to get you on the podcast for a very long time, but I've always been like, he's up in Tulsa. It's probably hard to get him down here, but we made it work.
We made it work, and it was actually at a really good time. Even though it's busy, it was a really good time. I'm
Yeah.
glad we got to make it work.
Yeah, and you were actually the prayer director just a couple weeks ago at our Camp Wow camp, and that was like what got in my mind of like, man, I really need to get Josh in on the podcast. So welcome in.
Thanks so much.
It's going to be a blessing for all of our listeners to get to spend some time hearing kind of your story and your heart. Josh is a guy that I definitely foresee us having on the podcast many times because the words that he shares of how the Father speaks to him and what the Father is teaching him, man, so many of you True North guys know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that. And so thank you for being here. Let's get started talking about you, which I know you don't love to do.
Yeah,
But you've responded to several camps now and kind
I
of
have.
shared parts of your story. And I'd love to share that with the audience today. And so let's kind of start with the True North side of things first, so the later parts of your life, and then we can dive back into kind of how you were raised and stuff. But how did you first hear about True North?
So I first heard about True North. Now, I was in this like on fire growing phase of my life, right? I was just sucking up everything I could from God to try to understand more about him, right? The reshaping, I guess, or the rebuilding of my life. And at that time, I was a leader over a community group, and there was this guy that was kind of, as you would classify, kind of like just super attached to his mom. And we were like, oh man, we need to take him to like a guy's event. Let's find something like in the area, rugged. We were in Oklahoma City at the time, and we'll rally around him and just come. And so we found, some John Eldridge stuff, and we're like, oh, there's one here in Oklahoma, which was True North. And so we signed him up for a weekend, drug him there. He spent his entire time in the bunk, and we got life-changing experiences. So it was the first time of many where I would drag a guy, but it was about me.
Yeah.
And it was like I'd drag a guy, but then deep heart work.
Yeah.
And then that became a repeated process till eventually I just gave in. And, I learned that I was on a journey of like fixing my heart. And so that was,
What year was that?
I guess I'm an OG. It was over 10 years ago.
Oh, wow.
I got saved in 2012, so it must have been 2013.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's been a while.
Yeah.
And so that was originally Anadarko. I remember just that, God speaking to me, the whole discovery of it was incredible.
It's wild to think like I actually approached you about being on the prayer team several years ago, and it's wild to think like now you're such a huge part and you've served so many times in that role of prayer director that it's like, wow, there was a time that he wasn't even on the prayer team for us.
I remember my first time at prayer team being almost terrified, like curled up, calling Damon in my bunk and saying, hey, I feel terrible right now. Just like totally out of my depths, trying to love on some people. And it was in the middle of a storm. My car wouldn't start. It was the whole thing that happens. And so, there was a time when I was just like the shadow.
Yeah.
And there was a time when I was just bringing guys to camp because it was the best thing I found to do heart surgery on these guys that I really loved, but were just either screwing up their lives or under bondage or, more recently, I kind of guilted some of my family because I was like, they're going to be around my kids. They better go to True North. I want to give them the best hope, for my kids and the men that are going to speak into their lives. So, yeah.
So let's rewind back to your childhood.
Yeah.
Did you have, you said you got saved in 2012. Did you have any history in the church? You grew up in the church?
Yeah. So I did. I grew up in a really good home. I grew up, I had two super loving parents. And I know I'm lucky. That's one of the things I learned at the first camp is, I grew up in a good house.
Yeah.
I grew up with a loving dad.
Yeah.
And people don't know what that's like. And so that realization moment happened at True North for me. But I grew up in a really good house in the church. And really, I was always getting these anchor experiences with God. And it says in Proverbs, like, raise them up in the way that they'll go and they'll return to it in their old age. And I am a exact example of that. I'm also example of the prodigal son story, but it's like, but uh, it was despite my parents that I fell,
Hmm.
right? I was also, I talk about this, in my when I respond, but I was a smart kid. I'm in tech now. I was in engineering college. And it's now how God talks to me, is how about figuring how things work.
Hmm.
And, that curiosity, regardless of safeguards or my family's protection, drew me to porn. We had a really young age through video games, and I circumvented all the protection that was supposed to be there. And it began this like dual life in me where
Hmm.
I was like good kid in church in the day,
Yeah.
playing all the right things. And so begins the pose,
Yeah.
right? And so begins the birth of the fake, of the hey, this is what I'm going to tell everybody in my family. And here's who I actually am becoming. But at the time, I didn't really see it like that. It was just this thing I was hiding. And, that continued. And I kind of describe it as it's like you're going into a cellar, and the stairway is actually a slide,
Hmm.
and it goes fast, and that slide down is quick. And you look at the years between that and before I went to college, and I would hold the line at certain things,
Hmm.
like, I would be like, nope, I'm going to be a virgin though for marriage, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to hold that line. And then, peer pressure, college, fraternity, drinking, all the things that started coming in where the world and people tell you this is how you need to be. And then my own intelligence started making me question certain things. Um, and started going into logic and reason of different things you're learning in college, but the main thing was just like it's the beauty, right?
Yeah.
That's what I was worshiping
Yeah.
in my private time, and in 50% of my life in the evenings I was worshiping the beauty.
Hmm.
And so as I fixed my eyes there instead of on God, it slowly slid away from me.
Hmm.
And so there came to a moment with you know a beauty queen that like I thought was it. And then I kind of shifted past that line, lost my virginity. Here's a new door. Here's a new slide. And so
Hmm.
you just slide down into a deep basement, and you're like, that's when, sexual addiction came into my life. And it just kind of like that door didn't just kind of creak open. It just widely swings open, and you're sitting, a couple years later, I'm at another door, and there was another relationship, another girl I thought I would be with. And all the while, I mean, at my school at the time, I was vice president of one of the largest universities in the United States. And I was helping with one of the largest disaster relief centers in US history. And I
Hmm.
was doing big things. And I thought, well, success could then become an identity. And
Yeah.
that became a God for me
Yeah.
too. And so I had, even my front facing self, and then my,
Yeah.
behind the doors,
Have
who
you
else?
figured out what question you were trying to answer with the beauty and with the success and
I think the success was, do I have what it takes?
yeah.
Right. And I think the beauty was, it was just this pursuit. And I don't know really what the question was there other than worship.
Yeah.
I think it was really worship. I think
Mhm.
it was fulfillment. I think it was really this desire in heart you have for God, but then I'm feeling it with her.
Mm.
And I mean, because where would I go for comfort? Where
Mhm.
would I go for when I had a bad day, when you were
Mhm.
stressed? These places that you go when like the world has pushed
Yeah.
in on you, and you've got like, where do you escape to?
Yeah. I'm curious to kind of maybe dive into your relationship with your father,
Yeah.
in the sense of, I mean, we're all used to, in this world, we're all used to hearing the fathers that just screwed everything up. And
Yeah.
like, it's just so obvious to point to how they weren't good dads. But you've already said your dad was a loving father.
Yeah.
First of all, looking back at it now, what did he do right? Like, how
Yeah.
can you define him as loving?
Yeah. I'll give you three examples. So the first was, I remember I must have been in middle school, and my dad woke me up early in the morning, and he brought me to our game room at the time, and we just sat down together, and we never done anything like that. And he opens up Proverbs, and he just started studying it with me. He said, "I feel like I need to study Proverbs with you.
Mm,
I need you to have wisdom in life." And I bet it was around a time, now that I look back, that work started getting really hard for dad. And,
mm,
he started having more responsibility and the understanding of God's wisdom for his son. Just reading his word with me was an anchor moment. It was one of those things that anchored me.
yeah,
He never failed to tell me he loved me. I hear a lot of guys that say I just, like, every time I saw him,
yeah,
I love you.
yeah,
He took time in high school to build cars with me, which now is a passion of mine that God has helped me rediscover and refather me in.
yeah.
But when I was in high school, we built a car together.
Wow.
And it was like, I'm going to take you and I'm going to show you can do this.
Yeah.
We're going to do hard things. And I'm going to do it. He went to church and he made me hand in a tithe. He made me come with him to see the important things he was doing for God.
Mhm.
And my dad was very successful. And part of the success thing was I was surrounded by a bunch of giants,
Mhm.
people who started some of the biggest companies in Oklahoma, some of the people that were, millionaires and billionaires. And you have these people all around you that are super successful. And you look at that and you're in their shadow,
Yeah.
and I got to catch up.
Yeah.
I've got competitive cousins and family members. Everybody was successful.
Yeah.
And so it became an identity
Yeah.
that got assigned to you. And you say that is what makes a man a man.
Mhm.
And you are defined by that, versus like looking at now Jesus, where that is the model of what is a man. And then I need to then build off of that model. So the model of which I was building off of, that was the only, but even when he was, where everybody else was only about that, my dad was about family and loving us and modeling the kingdom of God and making sure he tried to talk to us about hard things. I
Mhm.
remember specifically in discipline, he was really good. He would come in and first of all, he would send me to my room when he was upset. And I call it, he would send me to my room when I'm upset, and I would sit there for a long time. And I would just think of all the worst things that are about to happen. But what I realized is my dad was cooling off.
Yeah.
My dad was so upset that he was giving himself time to love me well.
Yeah.
And he would cool off with just these little things. And I would remember when I would talk back to him, he would clench his jaw like strongly, but then what came out of his mouth was always love.
Yeah.
And I think it's like grit your teeth and speak love. It's kind of, I wrote a song about it. It's like grit your teeth and speak love, because regardless of the moment, it's what you speak that matters.
Yeah.
And so I just remember, I'm trying to remember back to a time when he didn't do that, but he did. He did. And he did when he came and talked to me. Hey, we mom and dad love you. Let me explain why you're going to get this discipline. This is harder on us than it is on you. You got to understand that. You'll understand that later,
Mhm.
but I have to discipline you or I wouldn't love you.
Mhm.
And it was that. And most guys didn't get that. That was before True North was even a thing, or John Eldridge had even spoken about these important things.
Yeah.
It was just out of love. And it was probably a lot because he received a strong hand and he went the other way.
Mhm.
When he grew up. So,
Wow. That's incredible. And so going into kind of the slippery slope in the slides,
yeah,
that, man, it's interesting because normally a guy would be looking to fill the hurts and wounds from the father with the beauty, but yours is more of an obsession.
it was
And
more of an obsession. It was more of a like, that is what excites me. That's I think it was what the enemy did is he played upon my passions, and then
yeah,
he used those to bondage me,
yeah,
right? Because as you go down that slide, you get more and more chains, and it's more and more bondage till eventually you're addicted,
hmm,
until eventually you feel like you are in bars.
yeah,
And so I say all that to say, I know the deep, dark hurt of that place.
hmm,
I know what it's like to be in deep sin. I know what it's like God to pervert, or God to like pursue you, and then the enemy to try to pervert something that he meant for good. And that was hard. I remember days at work, I would call in sick because I was so depressed in my bed.
hmm,
I remember the dark
Hmm.
feeling, the empty gut feeling. I like, it feels like a giant hole in your chest and nothing will fill that void. I know what that feels like.
Yeah.
And so, that became really anchored in my life for a time, and I didn't really know how to get out. And honestly, I didn't know I was in bondage. That's the big thing, is
Yeah.
you didn't realize you were doing anything else besides the other people. And and it pushed me so far. Every step I kind of kept some relationship with God. But why I say I went away is there was a point where, there was like a pastor on the TV, and I couldn't stand to be in the room with him.
Mm.
Like, when truth was being spoken, my heart repelled against it, or the deep darkness in me was repelling against it. And that was like, oh no, I was far away. I
Hmm.
was in the pods with the pigs,
Yeah.
like that piece was, it's important for me to know that, because now I know what darkness feels like.
Hmm.
And now on the other side of it, I know what light feels like.
Yeah.
And so the contrast is very clear. It's
Yeah.
like the woman that comes up to Jesus and says, and is the prostitute, and he's like, who I forgave much loves much.
Hmm.
And I think that's the product of understanding what he saved me from,
Yeah.
and that I truly was in a pit,
Yeah.
you know.
What else happened in that season that could maybe give some more context to as well for to get to know you and
Yeah.
kind of what you've been through?
Yeah. So, so the next door was this. I was trying to have, there was a girl that came in to my life, and I had lied about with my parents to bring her on a trip, and and kind of deceived them just so we could have, sex. Um, and we ended up in a situation where another couple propositioned us, and on this cruise that we were off, somewhere else, and I didn't want to do it. I was something in me, and I remember these moments like this,
Yeah.
where something in me repelled the idea.
Hmm.
Like, I remember crying in closets in certain scenes and running out of rooms, literally, because the Holy Spirit was trying to help me not go down that door. But at that moment, I remember bawling, crying on one of those, cruise beds, and she's on the other, and she's like, "This is what I want to do, and I'm going to break up with you if you don't." And when that happened, I caved, because I thought, this is the one I'm supposed to be with. This is the girl. And I was like, okay. And at that moment, it was like I was drug into the bottom dungeon.
Mm.
And that really did create bondage. And I think at that point, I just became okay with everything, and created an affinity for it so that I could cope.
Mhm.
And most of the time, though, I call it like cancer to a relationship. If you want to get cancer and put it right in your relationship, that's what that is.
Yeah.
And
So was your professional life actually excelling at this moment, or
totally.
was it? Yeah.
Totally. Other side of the fence. So I went from high school, where I was, student body president, to college, where I had a 4.0, and that was in, engineering degree, then became, vice president of the university, homecoming king. And then I moved on to a really rare job in a Fortune, 100 company,
Yeah.
got trained up with a lot of incredibly smart people across the world. It was soaring. I was top of my class in that group, and then moved on, and went from success to success to success to success to success, because again, that was my God. That was my identity.
Mhm.
That's how I kind of like understood myself to be.
Yeah.
And so that's the other side of it. But you
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to know any of that
Yeah.
with the amount of compound lies it
Yeah.
takes to live a dual life,
Yeah.
you know?
And looking at it like from this, you know, looking back at it, it's like, man, what a cocktail of just pure
You have to keep track
destruction.
of your
Like the
lies. You have
fuse,
to keep track of
the
them. It's
fuse was
just,
lit,
it was
right?
lit.
Like,
Yeah, totally. Totally. And so let me kind of bring that to a point, right? So let's fast forward. God brought me to Oklahoma City. I know that. He brought me here, and there was a culture that was different in the Midwest, in Oklahoma, than what I saw on the East Coast,
mhm.
what I grew up with in the South. And God was everywhere. I mean, it was like, I can't believe they have crosses on their downtown,
Mm.
like
Yeah.
stuff like that. It was like, he brought me here. And then in the middle of that, I was living, I mean, the whole night of me getting saved is basically a testament to the problem I had, which was I was going from, like one restaurant after another, glorifying women, and then eventually ended up at a strip club and propositioned the stripper that night. And then drunk off, at 2 a.m, I stumble out, get into my car, and I hear boo behind me. And my heart sunk because
Mm,
I knew what that meant. And everything in me just crashed.
mm.
And so I'm just kind of walking through what seems like a movie, but it's your real life. And then I ended up in this drunk tank. And um, so some other guy over on the left in this white walled room. And, uh, and thank God he showed up.
Mm.
I didn't get saved by some pastor making a prayer call. I got saved in a drunk tank when the Spirit of God fell on me.
What?
And it fell on me in full weight. And then in that moment, he just showed me one truth. I think it's now called a gift of knowledge, but he showed me one thing. Here's who you are because of your deeds and your choices and your actions. And here's who you're telling the world you are. And in those two things, there was a massive contradiction, and I knew it to be true. And I just began bawling.
Mhm.
Well, first of all, the amount of love in that statement was overwhelming.
Yeah.
And then the weight of it just caused me to know. I just knew. And in that moment, I gave my life back to Christ because I knew who was talking to me. I knew that I was false, and I knew I did not want to be the person I was choosing to be in my actions,
Mhm.
but I wanted to be the person I saw myself in my head, in my heart,
Mhm.
that I was. I still saw myself as the boy before the storm,
Mhm.
and I go back to that, and I remember that moment. A series of awesome things happened. Uh, I I felt the Spirit tell me, "Hey, check my bank account." And so the officer had to check, give me my phone. I checked it, and at that very moment, the exact bail landed in my account from a delayed paycheck from a few months back. And so I get exactly the amount of money I need. I barely had enough money for that and a ride home on a taxi, and I fall on my floor, and I just prayed. I just prayed. And at that moment, that's the shift. And at that shift, I just spent the next what I call like my cocoon period. My life is forfeit. Tell me how to live.
Yeah.
Tell me how to live. I have no idea how to live. Tell me how to live. And so I dove into
And so
everything.
you're a single guy at this point?
Single guy,
And this was 2012?
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. 2012. It was 12/12/2012. That night I was actually going, celebrating the Mayan end of the world.
Okay.
Uh, Literally, that is the date their calendar ended.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, this is going to be, the end
Yeah.
of the world. This is what I'm going to choose to do on that day. Wow. And so, just like, man, the douchebagness
Oh,
of that moment was just like, wow.
well, something died then.
Yeah, something died for sure. And so that was back then. And then I read the Bible in 6 weeks. I had never read the Bible. And honestly, I spent a month in my birthday month trying to listen to the book of Joshua and got nothing out of it. Like, absolutely nothing out of it. But then I read the Bible in 6 weeks, and it felt like the Matrix was downloading into my brain. And I remember driving back and forth to Tulsa. I had a cousin who had married someone in seminary, and I was just sitting there with a book, just like with 50 questions every week. Just teach me, like, this doesn't make sense. And when you read the Bible, it was like I read the Bible on an island with no one around and no one to teach me about anything. I didn't have any theology. I didn't have any religiosity thrown in. It
Yeah.
was just, these are the words, and you either accept it or you don't.
Yeah.
And so I had to wrestle with some stuff. All the preconceived notions in my head, that was all done in that time.
Mhm.
And I didn't, that's all I did. All I did was that. And I didn't even know any worship songs. So I started making them up. I just started, just singing spontaneous worship all during the evenings. And then in the day, I would read about God, and I was just going to my work. And moment by moment, I made it through the skin of my teeth, and all of that got expunged. It's like it never was on my record. And it was like miracle moment after miracle moment after miracle moment. And I thought for sure my job is gone.
Yeah.
For sure. Because I would have one of those breathers, and I was bringing around
Yeah.
customers, and it quickly would have become a problem. And it was like, no, I didn't have to go through any of that.
Yeah.
And it was just wild. It was like the specific place in the specific little county that worked. And it just, God covering me. It's like he wanted to teach me a lesson, but only so much, right? Like just enough that I needed for the full 180.
Hmm.
So that was, I actually love that season of my life, because it's just like, if I could just live in that like cocooning presence and growth, it was just really a great time.
Yeah. So single, how long until you met Abby?
Yeah.
And
So years later, right? But it was through church this time, right?
okay.
So like,
Had you already been to base camp then?
well, numerous times. I
Okay.
went single. I went with a bunch of guys. I
Yeah.
would go with community groups and small groups. I was in, Life Church initially, and then I moved over uh, to another church here in the city, and I met her because I was the leader of the small group. Now,
Okay.
at the time, I was dating someone else, so we just knew each other as friends. But
Yeah.
then years later, I move away, which was kind of God's grace. I moved me away to Kansas City, and we just had a long-term relationship. But it was good because everything was communication.
Yeah.
Like everything was distance. He was keeping my weakness far
Yeah.
from me, right? And he just helped establish it. But it was in the right season and the right time. But before I got there, like you get through stuff,
Hmm.
but you don't get all the way through stuff. Like you
Hmm.
have affinities and other things that you need to work through. And I had built a relationship actually at the time I met Abby with someone that it was all for the wrong reasons. It was all, the worship that I had previously. And another moment for my dad is I remember this moment where I took her down to go meet them, and we had been engaged, about to get married, and my my parents just knew my life would be in a much rougher spot, and it would be much harder on me over time. So my mother was not about it at
Yeah.
all. But my father, he asked me to come into his study, and this is just an example. It had to have been God, but he asked me to come into his study. I was totally angry at this point. I was about to leave, um, and because they did not approve. And I go into his study, and he hands me this like paper from when I was a kid, like middle school. I had written it, and it was my father, the superhero. And it was just this whole book of how much my dad was my superhero. And that reminded me of my original love, the first love Jesus kind of talks about, but for my dad and my family. And and he just looks me in the eye. It wasn't a pitch. It wasn't a condemnation. He says, I love you, son,
Hmm.
and I can't lose my only son.
Hmm.
And he just hugged me.
Man.
That was it. That's all he did. And in that moment, I knew I had another choice. And I had a choice of either siding with love. Because when I walked back in the room with my ex fiance, it was nothing but venom. It was like nothing but venom.
Mm.
And so I'm like, on one hand, I'm being shown love and adore, and on this hand, I'm being shown venom, and I choose love.
Can we sit here for a second on this? Because I think for so many men that are dads, like a lot of men in True North culture have teenage daughters or teenage
Yeah.
sons or early 20s. Like that's the phase of life that we're in. And like I've even had, I've got a 17-year-old daughter and a
Yeah.
25-year-old daughter that it's like I think about those times of we've already had some relationships where we don't approve,
Yeah.
and how do we deal with that? And I'd love to hear kind of from your perspective what your parents did right and what maybe they did wrong too,
Yeah.
and but obviously hearing that the love kind of overcame.
I think if I'm to summarize it, my what repelled me when a parent did that was appealing to the mind, but what turned me was appealing to the heart.
Mm.
So what my mom was doing was give me the many reasons why this was a bad
The
idea.
practical
The
stuff.
practical stuff, which is where we go. It's the practical stuff and the rage is where we go.
Yes.
But my dad, I think, had to have gone and prayed.
Yeah.
Had to have gone and prayed. And that was the wise choice.
Yeah.
It's like it's an indirect route, but it's always the right choice. And
Yeah.
he got some level of wisdom,
Mhm.
whether he knew it or he didn't.
Mhm.
And he walks back in, and it was the perfect thing for me. And I was
Yeah.
enraged walking in.
Mm.
So I mean, love cuts through a lot.
Mhm.
Um,
Now, had your dad up done the practical approach already that weekend that you
no,
had visited, or he just
no.
kind of was sitting back and
He's
just
sitting back and learning and
yeah.
watching. And I think he understood how serious I was, and he understood the ramifications. And frankly, he'd walked through it a little bit before with my sister. And so he was like, he just understood the weight of it.
Mm.
And with the weight of it, it requires wisdom.
Mm.
And he valued wisdom. And wisdom only comes from God.
Yeah.
And so with that, he just valued the right things in a critical moment.
Mm.
And I think that is wisdom. It's the application of the knowledge in a really hard moment.
Yeah.
And I say this, and I mean it, because he's passed now. He saved my life.
Yeah.
My family, it's like we live in a heaven space.
Yeah.
And I say, I don't even say that lightly. It's like heaven has come to earth and it lives in our house. And I see it when my kids play. I see it when they go out and they're with other kids, and they're the loudest kids, and they don't stop laughing and giggling
Yeah.
all the time.
It's
And
like your dad's like, and I don't know what his dad was like, but like just legacy is the word that I hear.
totally.
Like he established this legacy of wisdom
Yeah.
and love.
Yeah.
And that's like, man, I would love for every man to hear how your dad approached
Yeah.
that situation. And you're not always gonna have a book that your
Yeah.
son or daughter wrote to you back when they were in middle school. That's gonna,
Yeah. Yeah.
but like God will lead you to that thing,
Totally.
right? Or to the memory, or to the just the thing you need to say.
We're all so different that really only God knows how to talk to us
Mhm.
each. And I've learned that when you talk to God, you learn that.
Yeah.
You learn that he knows how to talk to me. Why can Jesus tell me that? And anybody else, I would be angry about it, but I
Mhm.
just love that he told me that.
Yeah.
And it's because he knows how to speak to his kids.
Yeah.
And I think my dad just knew that the right answer was with him, and probably pulled that in. And so I think for men that are going through those situations, the answer is in the fruit, and in the good fruit, right? It's not in rage.
Mhm.
It's not in the worldly wisdom.
Mhm.
It is in love. It is in patience. My dad was patient. He sat back. He listened. It was in kindness, and it was in love. And I know that sounds very, we joke, but Mr. Rogers
Yeah.
like approach, but it wasn't. It was authentic and it was real.
Mhm.
But I don't think he would have gotten there alone. I know my dad. I don't think he would have gotten that level of wisdom on his own.
Wow, that's phenomenal. So you walk back out into the room, and you're faced with the love or the venom.
Oh, and so it was the worst car ride from Louisiana to Oklahoma I've ever taken. Yeah, she immediately knew something was up. My heart had been changed. Broke up on the way back. Something straight out of a Jerry Springer movie. When I got back to to town, it was a hard decision. It was not an easy decision, and I was in love too. So it was like the whole thing there that you
Wow.
were running into. So now you just have to walk away. But that's what I spoke when I was snot crying at my dad's funeral, is like, and I only had him for a few more years after that.
Wow.
But like, man, he loved me at the right moment. And that's like, you got to choose. You got to choose, like, hey, which tool am I going to use in this situation?
Mhm.
And he had, over the years and through practice, through the times of discipline prior, he just knew how to appropriately apply the right tool for the
Mhm.
job. And so anyways, we broke that off, but it was a sacrifice I laid down. And I kind of described this on the way up. I had to lay sacrifices. So I was, like in that jail cell, I had to make a choice, and I laid a lot of stuff down. I just laid down all of old me. So that gets laid at a door in a box, and it unlocks the door, and there's a staircase up. And so you go up a little bit more with God. And
Mhm.
then you get to another door, and he's going to ask you to lay something else down.
Mhm.
And this was one of those moments. I had to lay down, an engagement. And so
Yeah.
I chose, and I put that aside, and then the door opens, and then I move up a little bit more, and I'm presented with my wife now, Abby. And so with her, she was so much better in so many different ways. And there was some defining moments. Like I was, I had just a terrible day one day, and I was supposed to come down and see her, and I was like, I'm not going to come. It was really early in our relationship. It probably would have ended the relationship. And she just goes, whoa, 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 whoa. Are you okay? Like, are you okay? And I had never had that experience with a girl. I
No.
pretty much every relationship was like arguing and
Yeah.
fighting all the time,
Yeah.
and I just thought, oh yeah, she's gonna blow up, and it's gonna be the end of it. She goes, are you okay? And just wanted to hear how I was doing, when she herself was the one that was being put aside.
Mhm.
And that selfless, I call it communication without repercussion. We've now like established that as a basis for our communication, which allows us to freely communicate with each other. But she was teaching me, she was schooling me in the art of loving someone well, and understanding, and just understanding what they need,
Yeah.
right? And putting kind of yourself aside, and that just that was a turning moment for us. And I got to that to our marriage, and there was the final door I kind of described, which is like, over the years, through asexual addiction, you just gain all these trophies, all these images of old relationships, and God said to me, you cannot bring that in your marriage. So
Mm.
he had me put it all on a hard drive, like a single place, and then he had me throw it away in a dumpster.
What do you mean? Like,
Like pictures, conquest, trophies, like all of that was put in a digital space, so that I could have a physical thing, like the burning of the, at the base camp, we'll sometimes burn some of the agreements we
yeah.
make, and it was a physical representation of a spiritual decision.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was all of these things that I actually treasured at that moment, right? And I got rid of them, and I remember in my kitchen at a trash can, threw it away, and that was another offering at a door. And it was like just the breaking of all these connections to all these old relationships that I could not bring into my marriage. And that to me was another big door,
Yeah.
right? That was a big door, and it allowed me to walk into my marriage just focused on her, just
Yeah.
her now, you know. And coming from a place of sexual addiction, that's a really hard thing to do. It's like, I guess, throwing all the alcohol away in your house. It's kind of
Yeah.
the same thing that sometimes happens. And so I think that allowed me to like fully make this decision where nothing is hidden,
Yeah.
and that set a really good groundwork. But it was
Yeah.
God that told me to do that.
Yeah. So, did you ever have a disclosure?
I did. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, Abby knows really everything, is kind of the way that she fundamentally helped me with communication. I
Mm.
mean, she did it for me. So I just had to
Was
extend that
that
back to
early on?
really early on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Really early on. She just was really great at helping me learn how to communicate. And
Hmm.
what she taught me was that everybody, in every conversation you have with someone, when you give bad information, is teaching the other person how to communicate with them in the
Yeah.
future. And so I just came from a place of brokenness there. So she had to teach me.
Yeah.
And all the hiding that I was used to, all the things that were like, hidden, and then you have your normal self, this is good, and then this is hidden. She just helped me break away that barrier, so that when I was struggling, I just came to her. She was
Yeah.
my biggest ally in my struggle, and allowed me to help bring me back to a place of a healthy marriage.
That's so good. What else were you drawn to about her? Uh, that
Well,
meant
she
that.
was beautiful.
Yeah.
There's that. I felt like I really, out of my league. She's smarter than me. She's more beautiful than me. Like, she's got uh, a way. She likes all the cool stuff that guys like too. So it's like, we can watch the same movies. We can
Yeah.
do stuff. Each of us built our own car recently
Yeah.
together. She built her car. I built mine. Like, I hit the jackpot in so many ways. She's a great mother. But I think I had met my equal.
Yeah.
And then in it, there was peace. There was so much peace. I don't even say this lightly. Abby and I have never had an argument. We have disagreed
Yeah.
and we've done it respectfully, but we haven't had those yelling matches.
Yeah.
I know what those are like. We have not had that
Wow.
in 8 years of marriage.
Wow.
And it's like, uh, I am blessed.
Yeah.
And I am blessed. I am blessed. I am blessed. But I had to lay down something to get there.
Yeah.
Right.
Did you have a moment with your parents taking her home?
No, I mean, they loved her.
Yeah.
Yeah, they loved her.
Yeah.
They loved her. They were like, she is great. Like, and luckily my dad got to meet her. My mom loved her. My mom talks to her more than she does me now.
Yeah.
Like she has a great relationship with my sister. Again, my sister talks to her more. I need to talk to my family more is basically where it comes down to. But she's been so great. We've figured out a lot of partnership. She's also blessed she's getting her master's in marriage counseling. And so she's just blessed with the ability to help people unpack and communicate things.
Yeah.
I'm the emotional one in the relationship. She's the one that's the steady rock, and loves me really well. God knew what I needed. He had prepared it, but I wasn't ready for her. We both said if we would have met each other in our 20s, we probably would have never dated each other.
Yeah.
But God set us for the right time, knew what we needed. And truly, I was like, well, this is what a soulmate is like. And I now believe in that because I have it.
Yeah.
So it was a plethora of things, but on the surface, I mean, she was just beautiful.
That's what Jess says about me. If I would have met her any earlier than I did, she would have just thought I was a dork. And so I wouldn't have had a chance.
We used to say in our community group, like, one day Abby's going to realize she's just cooler than the rest of us, and then she's just going to move on. but she didn't, and
Sucker.
Yeah. So
that's awesome. So y'all got married.
Yeah.
And
we got 2 little kids.
Yeah.
And they are bundles of joy. It's funny, but James is like a perfect spitting image of me, and my daughter is like exactly like Abby, and so they're just exact kind of funny replicas of ourselves. But I then had a lot of training from True North at that time. Not to say, I mean, I'm learning. I mean, this dad thing is hard.
Yeah.
This dad thing is real hard.
Yeah.
And when you fail, having known better, it's totally different. And so I feel like I'm seeing it in a different light. I don't think my dad had this kind of training that True North provided me, but I was able to work out a lot of stuff that would have made it a lot worse.
Yeah.
A lot of things that Jesus helped me expose. You have to do hard things sometimes to get certain things out of your character.
Yeah.
And so from the time I was saved to only just recently, I feel like God has taken me on this decade character journey. It's just been what we talk about at Summit. It's like this whole decade just to work on me.
Yeah.
And luckily I took my wife along with me.
Yeah.
And she worked on her character. Yeah. I would take everything I learned at True North and I would bring it home. Yeah. And I'd say, this isn't just, these tools are not just for me. They're for us. And I would teach her and then give her time to go do the same. Yeah. And that character work allowed us both to become completely different people now than we were even when we were married.
What can you see in your parenting that 2 things that you're intentional about doing because your father did it? And what are some things you're intentional about doing because your father didn't do? Probably not as much of a pendulum shift as a lot of people have.
Yeah. Probably not. But from my father doing, we have dinner every night at the table. We have things and targets for our family, and we prioritize family. We take care of each other. All these principles I had, my kids, I make sure to sit down and explain things to them. I make sure that if they ask adult questions, I give them adult answers. Like if you're going to ask about God, I'm going to tell you a full answer. I'm not going to kid it down for you so that you can truly get this stuff.
Yeah.
What he didn't do, and I think what I missed in my youth, was a true understanding of God. I think sometimes it's hard for one generation to talk to another generation, especially if there's a couple of, generational gaps. And so I didn't get anything at church. And I was in a good church, but it was just the way that the pastor spoke and the way that I was able to understand. And I think what I'm pursuing now is a true understanding in their eyes. Do you get it? Do you
Yeah.
understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I'm pursuing that. I'm trying to make sure they understand why we say, don't do this.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make sure they understand the underlying of how things work and why we need to abstain from that.
Hmm.
And um, telling stories like this that hopefully one day, if my kids watch this, they will understand that I have been to that place, and it's not good.
Yeah.
What the world tells you is not right.
Yeah.
It's not true. It's not true. And this is true if you're to anchor on it. So that's like this pursuit I've got with my kids that I feel like I missed a little. We kind of say, oh
Yeah.
yeah, the pastor will take care of it, right? Like,
Man, we need to do a whole podcast on that.
yeah,
With
we do.
maybe have a few guys come in and just talk through like what kind of language do you use? Like, what does that look like? What are you looking for in your kids? Like, I love what you said about you're looking to make sure they're understanding what
Yes.
you're saying. You're looking for that, and I think a lot of parents struggle to know how to do that, or they're just like, the pastor's going to do such a better job at it than me.
Yeah, it's hard because it's inconvenient.
Yeah.
Like it takes a lot of effort
Yes.
to stop what you're doing and repeat yourself or find a new way
Hmm.
or get creative on
Hmm.
how you communicate something so that they can get it. But
Hmm.
when they get it, I know, and it's like, oh wow, like,
Hmm. You know what the
it,
fun stuff is for you as your kids get older is like they'll come back and they'll hear something from some other wise person in their lives, and
yeah, oh,
they'll
yeah,
talk about the revelation it was, and you're like, yeah, I've been telling you that for a very long time,
yeah,
and they're like, it
that's
didn't matter until someone else told them.
till someone else tells you. And
Yeah.
that's it, statistically, that's how kids receive information is their parents have very little influence on them.
Hmm.
If for as much time as we spend in them with them, it's mainly their peers. That's really where the influence comes, which teaches you to guard who your children hang
Yeah.
out with and make sure that they're in environments that will teach them truth and not have them wrestle with lies.
Hmm.
And so yeah, but it's just something now that I think I pursue in my kids is the understanding. It's something I value.
Yeah.
When I look at like different prayer directors across True North, everyone has their own gift,
Yeah.
right? And there's like a pursuit in Joseph's eyes, and I see this intimacy in Damon, right? But for me, it's understanding.
Mm.
And for the relationship I have with God is all about understanding,
Yeah.
because it's kind of what I needed, and it's helped me really place everything with concrete bricks
Yeah.
in my life.
Yeah. That's incredible. And so you've been kind of tying back to True North. You've been serving for several years now on the prayer team. And do you have any favorite stories or anything that you've experienced that you like to share?
Yeah. I'll share one, and I think he would be okay with me telling you this. So we've got a good friend, BJ,
Mm-hmm.
who he came to a camp. We were it was up closer to the Spring Valley, so it was up
Hmm.
closer to like Tulsa, and I was director at the time. And he comes up to me, and so here's this older man. I think I just met him either at that camp or maybe at one camp prior, but he came up to me and he said, you know, I I can't, I'm losing my ability to write.
Hmm.
And he said that I went to the doctor the previous week and I had a tumor in my brain, and it is growing. And it was just this black mass on the MRI. And he said, I'm losing my ability to like see and perceive words. And he said like, and then what broke me was when came back to the back of the room and he goes, I can't write Jesus's name this morning. And this was a man who's a missionary
Yeah.
for all of his life. And he just is weeping. This
Yeah.
older man is just weeping. And so I walk outside and I just weep on his behalf. And I go, God, I felt very ill equipped to heal someone.
Yeah.
And I said, but I was enraged at the tumor. I was enraged that this is occurring. For you, you prayed over everybody and they got healed. Everybody was healed in that. So what do I do? And what he told me was go grab 3 guys that love him really well. I don't care what their ranks are, the 3 people that love him the most. And he gave me a couple of names and some brothers I had served on prayer team before, but they were just attending.
Yeah.
And we went back and there was a song I had written called Heal Me. and I was not good at it. And it was like barely had written it. And I was like, so you want me to play that? And so he had me play a song. One of them laid hands on his head and just prayed in tongues. And they all just prayed over him. And in that moment, he knew he was healed. But it wasn't until he went back that he found, and it was months later I found this out, but he said that there's no more tumor in his brain. He immediately afterwards he could write. So I knew to at least test it. So I was like, hey, here's a pad. So he could write full sentences immediately afterwards. But the MRIs later showed that his tumor was completely gone.
Yep.
All of his reading and writing, you spend time with him now. He thought he was going to die. But later I also found out that it wasn't just one type of cancer. It was 3 cancers. And he had 3 different cancers in his body at the same time, and all were eradicated. And I just like that moment for me it was like a plead to the Father. I'm ill-equipped. It was out of your weakness. I am strong when you are weak. And that's what it was.
Yeah.
And and it taught me a lot. It taught me that prayer through love is super powerful.
Yeah.
That's why I think I got met by God in that drunk tank, was because my mom had been praying for me. It was a prayer of love. And so I just think love prayers are very, very powerful.
Yeah.
And even though it may not feel like it in the moment, I have so many stories in my life of where that's just like so true. Yeah. So they taught me that. And it also taught me, just do what he says. You don't have to be good at anything if you can hear God.
Yeah.
If you can hear God, you just literally don't have to be good at anything, because he'll just guide you in the right way.
A huge moment in that story is that you stepped outside and made yourself available to God, and you asked the Father, what am I supposed to do here?
Yeah.
And then you made yourself available. Whereas how many guys,
like
BJ's talking to them, telling them the story, and it's like, well, we're going to pray for you right now, which great heart.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's the way to go about it. But what we're learning through True North and what you've experienced so many times is make yourself available to hear what are we supposed to do, Father? How do we pray for this?
Yeah. And Jesus literally says, you do not know how you should pray.
Yeah.
And so he intercedes with you in groanings, which in this case was exactly what he said. He said, I need you to pray a perfect prayer, which you don't know how to do. So,
cool.
This is how we're going to do it. And he helped facilitate what was needed for that situation. I mean, all the stories of Jesus in healing are different. He said, I don't do but what I see the Father doing. Yeah. And so what I took from that is sometimes it takes for me to stop and ask.
Yeah.
And to stop and ask and not just say, well, I didn't hear anything, let's go. But stop and ask and wait till I get an answer and then act on the answer. And I learned a lot of that at True North. These tools were not things that just came to me. It was watching other men who had walked with God and heard from God and how they interacted and how it worked, and the pomp of it, like God has this way that he loves to pursue us that is really, really neat. But for me, it was one of those really awesome moments at True North. Yeah.
I'd love to. So as we finish this, I'd love to ask 2 more questions. Number 1, what are you learning right now? And number 2, what are you dreaming for right now?
Oh, okay. Those are heavy. So, okay, you're going to get long answers.
Good.
There was a few years ago that God, and so I don't know if sometimes I'm not sure who's listening, but I learned through True North how to really hear from God. And I learned that it's available. I remember being angry when I learned that, like, this is available, like, what, we can do this?
Yeah.
I remember that. And then I remember that we should be teaching this in church, because this is like the most fundamental thing of life.
Yeah.
And, but once, after taking a few journeys with God, and specifically, I remember a year where I spent an entire year where God just asked me this one question: if someone's life depended on you hearing from me, like if you're in a missionary situation where you're telling someone a word that could get them killed in their family, or because I had family that was on basically the front lines of mission work, and it brought to light that sometimes we're going to need to hear from God in life-threatening situations. And would I believe what I'm hearing? Right? Getting all the doubt out. No, I know my Father's voice. This is what he said. And with the confidence in that, and not in an insensitive way, with the full weight of what you're doing. And so that put me on a year of just trying to listen well. and just focusing on listening to him,
Mhm.
and did that in a group of people. So that wasn't an alone journey, because I think alone it can be really deceptive, but with a group you can really hone your
Yeah.
skills of when, no, that's not really from God. I'm not getting peace around that, all those types of things. And that was really, really helpful for me. So from that, the Father told me, you don't know me very well. And this was after like 6 years of True North. I was on prayer team. I was prayer director at the time. And I was like, what? Like but it struck me as true.
Yeah.
And it was because I wasn't really talking to the Father. I wasn't really hearing him. I didn't really know him. Now, knowing what I know, I didn't really know him. And so all he told me to do was to sit down. I remember distinctly, it was like at a lake house, me and my family. He told us to take a weekend away. We did. And we just pursued him, hearing him. And we knew that he was wanting to give us something. And then that weekend, he gave me my time with him. And it was sit down every morning, grab some coffee, open up a book, and just ask me questions. And that journey, which began somewhere around beginning of COVID, was some of the deepest I've ever gotten with God. It was bad for a lot of people. It was great for me
Mm.
because I got so deep with God, and it brought me on a journey to rediscover music and writing music. I think in that time, I must have written 500 songs
Golly.
with God, and they're really just him writing them, sharing his heart. And, but, but I have books of words from God of what I'm learning.
Yeah.
And here's the crazy thing. You can ask him anything and he doesn't withhold it.
Yeah.
I would think secrets of the universe, new energy, crazy new technologies that the world isn't ready for yet. These are things that God has shared.
Hmm.
And they're things that I just hold. And I just think, okay, now I have to steward that.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that's going to work. And I don't know how that's going to come about, but also concepts about him, the way that he puts the Trinity, the origin of things, the nature of good and evil is fascinating.
Hmm.
It's just fascinating. And these are questions you can ask him if you take the time to hone a skill. It's like, I've got a bow. I was given a gift, but I never used the thing. So I'm terrible at shooting recurve. I can't even hit because we don't take the time to hone our skills
Hmm.
of hearing from God.
Hmm.
And that to me was one of the most worthwhile pursuits in your life. And so I from it, I've learned all kinds of things. I feel like the wisdom that sits with the Father is tremendous. But what I've learned most is how good he is.
Mm.
It's hard to put to words. Jesus had me walk through the exercise this morning, and it was like, he said, just give me a word, like one word on how you describe me. And it was like, you're my friend. I wouldn't have said that before. You are like a brother to me. You're actually my mentor. So it's who I'm learning life now that my dad is gone. You are my hope, because if this is what we get, it would break my heart. But the hope of the kingdom of God is a worthwhile thing to pursue and
Yeah.
hope in.
Yeah.
Him being king is something that gives me hope. He is my savior, not just from that moment in that drunk tank, but literally my life has been saved on
Yeah.
3 major occasions
Yeah.
where I should be dead. And he's been my healer. So many supernatural healings that I didn't just see, but he did on me at critical moments in my life when it meant a lot. And he just like simplifying that down, but like every word is too cheap to describe Jesus
Yeah.
and describe the Father.
Well, and
They're just so good.
yeah, and it adds up that he asked you for one word and you gave him like 20.
Yeah, it's like, how can you do it?
That's
How can
how
you,
he created you.
because then you look at that
Yeah.
word and you say insufficient,
Yeah.
right? Like you look at how I feel about it, my closest brother, my closest friend,
Mhm.
Michael. I can't, I don't know. It's insufficient.
Yeah.
It's insufficient. All of them are insufficient.
Yeah.
And unless you know him, with that lifelong pursuit of getting to know him, it feels like an empty chasm that never ends.
Yeah.
And you're just in wonderment every time you walk through. And this is the life we're meant to live. We're meant to live in this fantastic, awestruck, life.
Yeah.
Let heaven come to, let your will be done. Let
Mhm.
your kingdom come. I feel like where I walk with him,
Mhm.
the kingdom is here.
Yeah.
And that's, that's what I pursue a lot. And so then your second question was,
What are you dreaming about?
oh man, so God's given me a lot, right? I'm dreaming about the possibilities of Oklahoma, our country, and the world. And I spent a lot of time in leadership now in big corporate, and I feel like there's been this shift in my heart of ownership. Of like I grew up in like so many different states, so many different homes. Whereas like he's like planted, like I'm going to be planted here in Oklahoma, and he's given me this plan for Oklahoma. Like it's a big plan,
Mhm.
and it takes a future of making a home for Christians.
Mhm.
Like Israel is a home for the Jews,
Mhm.
but where's home for Christian music? Where's home for Christian movies? Where's the home for just Christians who feel like they're persecuted in cities, major cities on the east and west coast? Let's let Oklahoma be a home,
A haven.
a haven
Yeah.
where it is celebrated here, so that like family, love,
Mhm.
light, the quality of the kingdom of God can
Mhm.
be seen again.
Yeah.
And I think like the richness of that in both business,
Mhm.
it's like these three parts that he's been describing to me, where there's business and there's government and there's the church, or let's call that nonprofit. We all should weave together.
Mhm.
All should weave together for the good of a community. And it was meant as this like trinity where there's order, right? There's like the family, right? And then there's this like cultivation of success, abundance. It's the wine that's too much for the evening.
Mhm.
These are all character traits of God,
Mhm.
his order and things. And so he's had me build a plan that hopefully I eventually get to share with the governor, and I eventually can walk them through how we transform this state to be
I'm
one
sure
of
the
the
governor
best.
watches this
I'm sure he
podcast,
does. I'm
so
sure he does. But the point is like, how in the world? Like, who am I? I'm
yeah.
not even in any of those spheres.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the steps I'm now taking. And so now what I'm dreaming about is companies and building
Yeah.
manufacturing here and emptying prisons for workforces and getting people off the streets and helping them get like, let's solve some major
Mhm.
problems. Because one thing God's given me that you guys haven't experienced much is innovation as light. This is what Jesus is talking to me a lot about, is he's going to give the church ideas,
Mhm.
concepts. We're going to solve the world's problems. We're going to
Mhm.
solve some of the biggest problems the world has ever had around water, around housing, around hunger. We're going to solve the big things that God thinks are human rights for people.
Mhm.
And with that, the light will be seen because all of that's coming from him. I didn't have any of these ideas. This isn't my plan.
Mhm.
Right. And so from that, I feel like that's the era we're in, which I'm really excited about
Yeah.
because I feel like God is going to embolden the church, and we're about to move in so many interesting ways. And he's basically said it's time to build.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm dreaming about. I'm dreaming
Yeah.
about a place where we can be that lighthouse
Mhm.
for the nation and
Mhm.
eventually the world that helps show what the kingdom of God is like.
Yeah.
So what is the kingdom of God like? Well, just look at Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that will be
I
such a
love
stark
that.
contrast picture
Yeah.
to what's going on in the time we live.
Yeah.
And that's part of my hope and what
Yeah.
I'm dreaming about.
I loved. So I went and watched Bonhoeffer last night.
Oh wow.
So Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a pastor in Germany.
Yeah.
Was born and raised in Germany back in the World War II days, and so the movie, just kind of follows his life. And as the war's beginning, and Jews are starting to be, taken, and bad things are happening, and he's speaking out against the uh, the
Yeah.
Nazi regime within the Germany church, and he becomes a target, and the fight's beginning, and he actually gets kind of taken by some of these other guys to a seminary that is kind of rural, and during that he it was very frustrated because he was in a safe place,
Mm,
and he wanted to be back in where all this stuff was happening,
yeah.
but like he would have been killed had he been there. And one of the older pastors that was in there with him just told him, like, this is a haven for you to come into, and
Yeah.
we'll base our attack out of this.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you're talking about.
And I felt for years that True North was the general training ground. It was
Hmm.
like Annapolis for the church.
Yeah.
If we're, but not to remain.
Hmm.
It's to send out.
Yeah.
It's to go into your own battle arena. And
Yes.
I live in one of those where I
Yes.
feel like none of the values I hold true and I know are anchored, what builds success, are valued at all.
Hmm.
And I've pled with God, why am I here? And he's like, remain,
Yeah.
remain. And I'm like, well, can I just go be, when my cousin became a missionary, I was like, can I sell everything and go with him? No,
Yeah.
stay. And I think it's harder to stay and hearing God and everything works out great. That's the normal story. But then there's a lot of times where he's like, no, I need you there.
Hmm.
I need you to stop. I need you to remain in the position that you're in to take care of the people that I've given you.
Yeah.
Like these are the types of things that he is teaching me. How do you become a good king?
Hmm.
Kind of king training now.
Yeah.
How do you become a good king? And to learn that from Jesus himself
Yeah.
is great training,
Yeah.
because I didn't grow up in a court. I didn't grow up in a powerful home. I
Uh-huh.
didn't grow up in the wealth of America, but I know what is in the heart of the Father for us in this season and hour that we're in, and how we are uniquely positioned. One thing he told me is, I said, is it our generation that will when the great awakening will come, or when your great harvest will be? And he says, if it's not you, it's not you if you don't do it. And I'll do it through the next generation,
Mm.
but he'll do it. But that just told me, oh, like there's a choice here.
Yeah.
We either have to say we are the ones,
Mhm.
we are the ones that are going to see transformation in the church,
Mhm.
or we won't. And it gave me this like ownership of, like, I thought you were going to come and you
Mhm.
were just going to conquer everybody and it was going to be great.
Yeah.
You were going to set up Zion. I'm moving in. It's
Yeah.
going to be awesome. And we're all going to rule from this cool place of safety over there. And, your superpowers are just going to destroy everyone. Like, I feel more that I talk with him, it's about preparing a bride price for the bridal dinner.
Mm.
Like, could we build the kingdom of God here with him now, so that when he comes, there is already established a place.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
that blessed is those that when I come, they're found doing the will of my Father.
Yeah.
That's, I think, more his heart.
Well, and why do we pray that in the Lord's Prayer?
Yeah.
Right? Like, thy
Yeah.
kingdom come, thy will be done.
Yeah.
Like, we're not waiting to die to go into it. Like, we want to establish the kingdom here and now.
Yeah.
And we have that ability and availability. And I think men like you are exactly who God and is just implementing to bring the kingdom in. And I think we just keep
Yeah.
like at Basecamp, we're seeing the kingdom
Totally.
right in front of our eyes.
Totally. We're
And-
in it for like a weekend and we're
Yeah.
like, this is great.
Yeah.
Why can't we, what we can?
We can.
It's this like, Jesus looked at me once and he said, you know what your problem is? Self-pity.
Mm.
I too many times would self-pity myself when I would go out, but then like, why isn't this, happening everywhere? Well, you probably need to pick up a shovel and start digging, or start working, or what do you need to do to transform the environment that you're in?
Mm-hmm.
We're to leaven the whole lump.
Yeah.
Right. We're meant to transform.
Yeah.
And we're agents of that transformation. And I think that he is going to work through us in each our respective domains. One of the things I've learned through True North, I think, is so fascinating. And I learned this really at Summit. I looked around the room and I'm like, this is what it's like to be in a room with a bunch of men that are wholehearted. What is it like to meet a man who has a whole heart?
Mm-hmm.
And it was fascinating.
Yeah.
These men are fascinating, each in their own right. And they each have a incredible mission of something the world drastically needs. And you just got to dig for it. So now I'm just fascinated, like learning about people who have walked through wholeness, because they're fascinating people.
Yeah.
And it's some of the most interesting individuals. It's so fast past, all the surface level stuff. And now we're down to real important matters.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just really cool. It's really cool what has been cultivated here at True North. But it's also cool to see like it as a function of the kingdom, in the greater mission of what God is doing.
Yeah, I love that, man. Josh, thank you for coming on. Thank you for who you are. and the influence you've had on myself and so many other men that I have firsthand knowledge of the life that you've spoken into them through the Father speaking through you
Yeah, it's him.
and you making yourself available. Like I
Yeah,
can't speak to it enough of how God has used you in the lives of so many men within True North and how critical of a part of True North that you are.
yeah,
And I'm excited to continue to build on this and work
yeah.
together and dream together. And I just love your heart, and I love having you a part of this. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you,
This
James.
will not be the last time. We
Yeah,
will have to get you on for
yeah,
some more
no,
topical stuff
yeah,
and go
totally.
through stuff. But yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, James. And you probably get this all the time, but like the heart of True North, you know it through the leadership. A culture is established by the leader,
Mhm.
and that heart that has now taken root inside of True North is a safe and good place, and it reflects the Father I know. That is so important because I don't think you're going to feel God's presence in places where he does not dwell.
Mhm.
And he dwells in places that resonate with his heart.
Mhm.
And that's just so important. And to keep that as an anchor, and I know that's true, and how much you all, even though in short moments and in short passing with each man that you see, which behind them is a huge story,
Mhm.
you guys are loving them well and helping them through a very hard transition of the realities I had. I see a guy like me in that drunk tank every time look at someone who comes through the door at True North. And the work that you're doing here is so important. Your general training.
Mhm.
You're training the generals of tomorrow,
Yeah.
today, to help restore families, then restore businesses, and then restore communities, and
Mhm.
then restore countries. And it's all of that is the fruit. It's the
Yeah.
tapestry of this. So thank you for dedicating your life to this
Yeah.
and spinning and sowing into us,
Yeah.
because all the things that I talk about, you were a part of,
Mm.
together.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
thank you.